What I really want to know what you feel about what happened with Chief Burrell and gassing and the peaceful protesters, shooting them with rubber bullets and then lying about it and saying that he had, he gave false reasons for why he did do it.
Yeah.
And then he was made to correct that police report and other statements he had made. And then a week later, he finally said that he would no longer gas the peaceful protesters.
Yep.
And so personally, I think that was a nice step forward, like at least we made some progress there with the guy. But what was your feeling and your take on the fact that the police here locally, as well as the mayor, supported the idea of gassing?
There were so many mistakes made, and underlying all of those mistakes is the problem of opacity in our government, a lack of transparency in our government, which continues to exist around the situation where we've still yet to see a formal apology for what happened. We've still yet to see the body cam footage that they said they've released, and we've still yet to see a formal statement in writing that corrects the incorrect account of events that was originally put out by the police department. So we absolutely need all those things. Beyond that, if we're going to meaningfully apologize, I say we, I wasn't involved in this decision at all. I wasn't even in the local government yet. If the local government and the police department and the chief and the mayor and the manager are going to make an apology meaningful, of course an apology is, you start by telling the story, so they got to tell the story and apologize meaningfully. But then beyond that, they need to take action. And I was disappointed to see that no action was taken budgetarily to correct anything in this last, the conclusion of the last budget cycle, the last meeting they had last week. Certain things were done kind of vaguely that are being framed as progress, but nothing is going to have an immediate effect. And forming another committee with a very vague charge to that committee certainly doesn't get us anywhere anytime soon, and doesn't even guarantee that we get anywhere at all. So among the things that our local government could do right off the bat would be to demilitarize the police, like give them the same, they've got the same budget, but let's take away the armored vehicles. Let's pass a policy that bans the use of tear gas ever again. More importantly, I think we need to think critically about the fact that Georgia football games can happen without that kind of presence in town, and there are way more people being way more rowdy and dangerous. Why were these protests seen as so threatening that we needed to have this show of force? And certainly, why was any use of force enacted upon, why was violence enacted upon peaceful protesters? Like, fundamentally, that reveals a problem in the way, again, public safety is imagined in our community, and a need for us to reimagine it, that peaceful protesters are seen as a threat, and that enacting violence upon them is seen as part of the job of public safety. Like, that's just so Orwellian and bizarre and Twilight Zone that I'm almost shocked that I even need to be saying it right now, because I would like to think that the people already in office, who I've generally thought share I think to a large degree, our values, would also agree with that, So I can't speak to why they're not formally apologizing. I can't speak to why they're not acting more swiftly. I can't speak to why they made those decisions in the first place, because I am not them. And ultimately, what I think they need to do is not only issue those formal statements in writing, but also have a press conference with the community. Have an open dialogue with the press and the community present, and start being transparent and engaged, and start making it right. And that should have started, frankly, a month ago. So it's only more frustrating each day that we have to keep almost like fighting just to have a conversation, an honest conversation.
Oh. The mayor has said that we are unable to legalize or decriminalize cannabis because the Solicitor General is kind of standing in the way, because he really wants to abide by the state law without dipping his toes in any type of troubled waters. And there's already been two places in Georgia, minimally, that you know of that have decriminalized and are doing nothing more than writing a ticket at worst.
Yeah.
So what are your feelings about how Athens kind of takes an independent stance on this?
I absolutely think we need to decriminalize marijuana. I actually think we need to decriminalize a lot more than just marijuana. And this argument that we can't do it because the Solicitor General is against it is false. The Mayor and Commission can still do it. Whether it would be practically implemented is determined by whether the Solicitor General is going to honor that or not. But we should also remember that the Solicitor General is also an elected official. And so if elected officials pass a law that another elected official doesn't want to adhere to, well, then maybe it's time to replace that other elected official with the same people who believe these people should be here. So ultimately, I disagree with the Solicitor General on his stance, and it frustrates me that that's being used as an excuse for inaction.
Who is our Solicitor General?
C.R. Chisholm.
And when is he up for re-election?
I believe in 2 more years.
But he has enough power to stop progress in this kind of arena.
Well, by virtue of being the Solicitor General, he can basically say, you can write that law, but I'm not going to cite it when I'm deciding how to approach court cases. And so that is essentially within his power. To some degree, debatably, but the argument that we could pass decriminalization, but it may not practically change anything because we have a Solicitor General who won't honor it, or say because we had a police department that would still choose to arrest people under federal law, right? That could still happen, right? So the Mayor and Commission has direct say over how the police department behaves because the Mayor and Commission is the boss of the manager, who's the boss of the chief, who's the boss of the police. Mayor and Commission does not have that same relationship with the Solicitor General. Solicitor General has more independence, but similar to judges, and the DA is an elected official, and so ultimately, I would like to see advocacy get focused on the Solicitor General to make sure he honors it. But really, the Mayor and Commission, in my opinion, I'm actually shocked that they still haven't decriminalized marijuana. A lot of what the local government can do, because especially if it's acting as a unified body on behalf of the community of Athens, is embolden certain causes. So things that we might want to do on the local level, but we are in some capacity handcuffed by state or federal law. Well, the local government can pass resolutions, and local representatives can advocate by, with, and for the people for those changes on the state and federal level. So I do think we need more of that. We need a local government who's more willing to speak up about these changes that we want to see as a community on the state and federal level. But certainly, decriminalization is something that can happen on the local level. So that specific issue isn't just a symbolic gesture. The reality is you're almost 5 times as likely to be arrested for marijuana possession in this town if you're black than if you're white. And that's been the case for years, and it took an investigative journalism piece to really clarify how bad that rate is, and that rate is worse than the national average, which of course the national average is also that you're disproportionately likely to be arrested. But instead of it being closer to 4%, it's closer to 5%, closer to 4 times as likely, or closer to 5 times as likely in Athens. So, we're actually worse than average in Athens for putting people in cages for a personal decision to partake in a substance that I think certainly a vast majority of people in America and a vast majority of people in this community understand is nowhere near as dangerous as other things that it's classified alongside. That marijuana is not heroin or something. And I actually, my view about decriminalization goes beyond marijuana into, I think, drug possession in general should be decriminalized. I don't think we gain anything by wrapping people who have substance use, people who use substances, whether that's debilitating for them or recreational, whatever. I don't think we do them or community or society in general any good by locking them in cages and criminalizing. And so it doesn't make sense to me that any drugs are criminalized.
Do you believe in forced rehabilitation or just letting them go?
I'm generally against forcing people to do most things. I think there is a reality that there are certain behaviors that are dangerous, and we need to think about criminal justice reform in a context of there are people who are dangerous and how do we handle that danger. But broadly speaking, the approach to criminal justice, which I feel should be in quotes, in this country and in this community, is, in my opinion, woefully at odds with compassion or science or reason, really, and it's very much the result of a country built on slavery that has in its machinations, found ways to continue to enslave people. And that's another thing we're seeing on the local level with the use of unpaid inmate labor. The use of unpaid inmate labor. We have hundreds of people in the state prison that do work for the county for free. They're locked in cages and are only let out when they do work for the county for free. And that plays into this incentive of cost savings by using these people's labor for free. So there's an economic capital bottom line benefit to locking people in cages, because then you can use their labor for free. And we see how that's disproportionately done to communities of color, who are also disproportionately surveilled and policed and arrested. And so at every level, this is disproportionately done to black and brown people, as it has been the whole course of United States history. And so everything about the war on drugs and the criminalization of substances is, in my view, just an extension of that racist system that needs to be, to put it plainly, like abolished and transformed and replaced with something better.
Yeah, Jesse. I think it is more than symbolic, like you said, if the commissioner and the mayors do pass this, because the police might listen to y'all more than the Solicitor General. The Solicitor General is the third in line here.
Well, formally, the police have to listen to the mayor and commission.
Just like they're doing on the ICE situation,
Yeah.
right? Where they kind of are listening to you all on that and have stated that they're kind of going by what the bosses are saying.
Yeah, I mean, ICE is a bit different. I mean, it's another indication of what I think is kind of woefully wrong in our society is how many different armed police agencies we have overlapping any given geographic area of the country. And so here in Athens, we have the University of Georgia Police and the ACCPD and the Sheriff's Department, as well as, of course, the various state and federal agencies. For a while, we had a Homeland Security office in town, which is now thankfully gone. The cooperation with ICE conversation is largely about how the Sheriff's Department is going to engage with ICE, and less about what the local police department does. And of course, the sheriff is a separate elected official who oversees all the sheriff's deputies, as well as the way the jail is run. And I'm really excited about John Q's campaign for sheriff. I should probably give a shout out to John Q, who was at my campaign kickoff and who I've been really excited about from the get. And I'm glad that he's made it through the primary, and I'm hoping that he's going to make it on into being our next sheriff. And he's been very clear from the get about his stance on ICE and non-cooperation with ICE, which I think is important. I would also like to see us as a community find ways that we can use. We've got a police department right now. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. And I do think that we need to make a lot of changes in how that department is resourced and directed, and what their policies are and what their training is. But one of the things that we can do kind of right off the bat is when advisories are sent to the community that ICE is on its way, I would like to see our police department see that as an opportunity to be in service of the community and let them know, so that, which is different than what's currently happening. So that is a way that I think our community can and should do more, and our police department can and should do more. Exactly how we can direct that to happen is something I've still got to work out with fellow commissioners who agree with me on that. But
since our government clearly isn't always acting in our best interest and is using disinformation against its own people, how can we realistically educate people to vote, spend, and behave in ways that actually support their own best interests, and therefore bring America back to the people?
I think the media is incredibly important. So the kind of work you're doing of distributing information is incredibly important, and not taking for granted that, really being able to look at the source. So a lot of that I really think is the community of Athens, finding stronger media again. We've lost a lot of our daily news here. As far as my role as a commissioner in helping facilitate that, I think having a more transparent and engaged government is something we need, and we have needed all along. One of the things we fought for years, that was a bit of a fight, was just to get the work sessions recorded, so there would actually be a record of the discussions that our elected officials were having around the things that they'd be voting on, which should be something we would think, would be obviously public. But there are plenty of other committee meetings and things that I think we would do well to have recorded as well. Beyond that, I think the onus is on people in office, especially elected officials, to engage the public regularly in conversation. And I also view that as not only informing people about what's going on, but also inviting their input to meaningfully contribute to the bigger decisions that are going to be made.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we are just bombarded with this cacophony of noise, you know, and it's hard to make sense. I mean, we're dealing with that with coronavirus right now, right? You know, the WHO one day says you don't have to worry about surfaces, and then 2 days later redacts that statement. So even sources that we would think of as fairly like reliable and scientific give us conflicting information.
Right. So how do you find your information then?
A bit of it's trusting my guts, and a lot of it, you know, a lot of why I'm running for local office, or am hopefully, swearing into local office now.
Yes.
And to me, that's kind of the max level I feel I can really operate on, because beyond that, it starts to feel almost inhuman, the machinations that exist on the state and federal level, even though some of the changes we need societally need to happen on that scale.
Right.
So I appreciate that work is important, but for me, I have a hard time being able to direct my energy and good faith into things where I don't feel like I have a human connection. And so for me, a lot of it is that relationship building with people in the community and developing trusting relationships with people so I can trust that what they're relaying to me is more reliable. And so what I hope to do as a commissioner is be somebody who is engaged with and trusted by the majority, ideally all, but at least the majority of folks in Athens, and especially in District 6.
And as commissioner, what is your generalized agenda? Like, what would you like to accomplish in your tenure?
Keeping the sewer system functioning correctly and our solid waste services functioning are things that we need to keep up. Keeping the roads maintained is a huge part of the job. So I'll of course be doing that. What I'm interested in advancing first and foremost is economic and racial justice. And everything on that platform I see is interrelated. We talk about environmental justice, we talk about housing justice, affordable housing, all these things intersect. We talk about transforming public safety, they all intersect. But at the core, we need to reckon with the racist and colonialist history of this country and this community. And part of that requires telling the story honestly and hearing it from the people who are and have been historically directly affected, and then responding with that in mind and at the forefront of where services need to go and who needs to be reached out to most and first. And so the poverty rate that we've been suffering for as long as I've lived here and long before I lived here, I've been here for 12 years, has been a stagnant, very high number, and that needs to change. And it exists alongside a not quite stagnant, but worsening, also very high wealth inequality rate. And so, we need to, quite frankly, just think about how to redistribute those resources in a way that's more equitable and just. And we need to recognize that the folks who are suffering the most are disproportionately Black and brown neighbors of our community, who are left out of the processes in a variety of systematic ways, as well as the sort of nuanced day-to-day personal interactions. And so I hope to be a force to counter that.
There was money to move the monument in the last mayor's budget, but they were curious what happened to the allocation for social services into the police department.
Yeah, I think the movement to defund police is focusing on police. I think what a good reframe for folks who don't already agree with that I try to focus on is public safety.
Yeah.
So, that's how it's described in the budget. We have a public safety budget that takes up over 50% of our county's budget. So most of the money that we're moving around in this county publicly falls under the broad umbrella of public safety. And then I think we need to examine, I would say through a lens of economic and racial justice, with a recognition of that history and the legacy of that history in our present reality, what public safety really is and who is that in service of, and who is that not currently in service of. So I do think that we need to be moving money from conventional policing into other services, and that money is there in the budget. The most obvious first step I think we need to take is to demilitarize our police. There's a lot of money spent just on equipment that's very militaristic, on vehicles and guns and surveillance equipment that I don't think we need, that I don't think no public safety department needs, and so that, we spend tens of thousands of dollars a year just to insure armored vehicles. So, they come into the county from Homeland Security or some other federal agency as a gift, and that's a dubious situation to begin with, and certainly something I will always vote against. No more free gifts of militarized vehicles, so as far as I can help it. But it's not free, because then you have to insure that. You have to park it, house it, put the fuel in it when you drive it around to show it off, and it's kind of a weird thing to be showing off in the first place. So something like moving a monument is frankly a drop in the bucket compared to the millions of dollars we're talking about spending. And moving that monument, I think, is only a meaningful act insofar as it's accompanied by other more substantive changes to the way that we approach public safety and the way that we invest in public services. It's not just about moving money from militarized police infrastructure into a vacuum. It's about intentionally moving that into under-resourced programming and services. I think the really unfortunate situation we find ourselves in is we're up against a mountain of problems that can't all be solved at once. So I don't want to sit here and say, well, I'm going to get in there and we're going to make everything happen right away. For the combined reasons of I'm entering as one commissioner of 10, and also the mayor does set the agenda, but we should be careful to not conflate that with inaction. I think too often there's sort of a culture of passing the buck, and I don't want to do that. I'm going to work hard for these things on a daily basis. I intend to treat this as a full-time job, and I tend to treat full-time jobs like jobs that I work overtime. So I'll probably be at this for more than 40 hours a week on an average week. What I can say is that I'm encouraged by the pushes in equity we've seen over the past couple years, and I'm also aware that it's taken loud, persistent voices on the commission to kind of force equity into these policies. And so there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to continue to build equity in a meaningful way, as well as probably a fair amount of reevaluation that's going to need to be done to say, well, we have this or that plan that we're working through, these 40 pages, but is that really prioritized in a way that it ought to be if we're thinking about, again, economic and racial justice, if we're thinking about redressing this legacy of harm. But it does feel important to me that the neighborhoods that are lower income get their services and their infrastructure first, which tends to be counter to the way things have run to date, which is that usually it's the wealthier neighborhoods that get things first, for the combined reasons of connections they may have to leverage their influence, and also just the time they have to advocate for themselves. And so where that also brings me, and I hope to do this in coalition with other allied commissioners on the commission, ideally with the entire commission, is to bring the government out of City Hall and into the community to try to facilitate community organizing so that neighborhoods that aren't already organized can have more of a voice in these processes and can participate more meaningfully. It would be really easy for me to say, well, now that I'm commissioner, I'm just going to meet with the existing neighborhood associations and kind of say my door's open. And I think we need to change that mentality and say, I'm going to go to your door, and I'm going to try to help other neighborhoods coalesce as best they can so that folks have a voice on that level. Because I think ultimately the best way our local government can work is not just for the people, but really with the people. And I often describe that as like, leave the kind of day-to-day drudgery of figuring out logistics to the mayor and commission and the staff. But the good stuff and the big stuff, the big decisions around where money's going to go and the big plans, master plans and things, that we really need to involve the community in that process. And not just at a single stage, but throughout. And that involves, I think, building infrastructure, like social, like interpersonal infrastructure, so that people can do that themselves. And they're not just waiting for an email update from me once a month or something. Although initially, that's a lot of how it's going to work, right? Is I'll be sending out emails once a month and trying to organize. They'll probably be virtual in the beginning, but hopefully we get to a point sooner than later where we can start safely organizing in person.
You want a lot of community involvement, is what you're saying.
Absolutely,
You really want to be a man of the people, with the people, for the people. What gives you that drive, Jesse?
Well, I'm a people. I mean, I don't know. I grew up with some pretty rough circumstances, and rough enough that I came to an understanding of racial politics later than I might have otherwise, because there are things I didn't really understand about white privilege, because I was like, what privilege for me, And upon reflection, I'm like, oh, that's actually how I'm still here instead of in prison or something, probably,
Right.
But yeah, I guess just like from an early age, seeing these layers of injustice and having kind of a social inclination to talk with people, and being especially excited to talk with people I don't know or who maybe have differing views, and being kind of energized by working through conflict and misunderstanding into hopefully like mutual growth. Like that's kind of how I just like to approach my day-to-day life with people.
Yeah.
And so because I kind of have that natural inclination to enjoy those interactions, and I've done a lot of traveling, I've been to a bunch of countries and all around I've been to every state, and I've done that in a variety of ways, including for a couple of years living without money and hitchhiking everywhere, and meeting folks very at random and in a lot of pretty like rough circumstances. I think it's just instilled in me repeatedly over the years, just kind of like a deeply ingrained appreciation for how much suffering in this world exists alongside abundance and security, and how unjust it is that it's a super minority of people that experience and benefit from that abundance and security, and that the apparatus that provides that is quite literally built by the like blood, sweat, and tears of this group. And so just seeing that play out in all these anecdotal ways, and doing a fair amount of reading and learning and listening, more academically, I guess you could say, as well as politically, about the systems at play that create this. I have a passion for trying to do right by the people who, I share a humanity with.
How do you answer to the critics that say that kind of thinking is more socialist or even communist?
I mean, you can call that thinking whatever you want. I'm not afraid of the word socialist, I identify as a democratic socialist. So I think it's important. Part of the work we have to do, I think, is to help educate each other on what these terms mean, but socialism at its core, I think, holds a value in society, whereas capitalism at its core holds a value in individualism, or kind of like a meritocracy-based approach to things. And when I think about what I want to be at the core of the decisions we make individually and collectively, it's for the benefit of the whole. It's for the benefit of society, and not for the benefit of the individual. I actually think the individual benefits from things that we do socially as a society. And so, yeah, sure, socialism's fine.
Do you think that there should be a limit to how much somebody can make, or you just would like to see more of the other end of increasing what the other end is making?
Well, I definitely think we need to raise the minimum wage, and we need to recognize that the cost of living has gone up, and also the productivity of our society has gone up, the GDP, but the average income for folks and certainly the minimum wage has not gone up, and that's the story all over America and all over most of the world, that the 99%, right, the majority of people are feeling the squeeze more and more, whether they're working class or middle class, or unemployed, underemployed, disabled, all these different intersecting identities. Like, most of everyone is feeling more and more of the squeeze, working harder to have the same or less. And there's this almost unfathomably small group of people with a fairly unfathomable amount of wealth and power derived from that wealth. And that is, I think, quite fundamentally unjust. I don't think anybody in this world needs to be a billionaire, but the truth is, you take the wealthiest 400 people in America and just tax them heavily, very heavily, and redistribute their hundreds of billions. They can still be billionaires, which is an insane amount of money, more than anyone needs, and we would have enough money to accomplish incredible things, certainly to give everybody health insurance and ensure social safety nets around food and housing and things like that.
And when you say redistribute, do you mean actually go into their bank account and take the money out of a personal account, or do you mean in like what you expect from them as business people?
I mean, I think the mechanism that we have in our society of taxation, is the tool we should leverage for that. And right. Some of the best progress we made in terms of class, the early 20th century and the New Deal era, and afterwards, even under Republican presidents like Eisenhower and stuff, there was a very, very high tax rate for the wealthiest tax bracket, the highest tax bracket. And we're far from that now. It was as high as 92% at one point. Now it's down in the 30s, and there's all these loopholes and these offshore accounts and things. So there's a fair amount of, just making the whole tax system work better and sewing up those loopholes. But there's also just the reality that we need to raise taxes on the rich.
So what is your intention on how to get people that aren't necessarily aware of your positive intentions to get them to be on board with at least giving you the opportunity?
I kind of feel like that coalition is already built. We were close to a voting majority already in the previous election, and I feel fairly confident that we're already there moving forward.
Good.
So it's just going to be a matter of keeping the public informed enough about when the elections are happening, and then mobilizing people to vote again. I almost think a lot of the work is just going to be turning out the people who are already supportive to know when to show up.
Yeah, I gotcha. Thank you very much, Jesse. I appreciate your time today, brother, and I wish you nothing but the best.
Thank you. Yeah.